the city, the beats are big and the lights are pretty. So why can't we get to the busy where the dreams are in the sky? You got me high on wonders and why.
One of the most toxic things within traditional conservative Christianity today is the complete lack of understanding and goodwill towards opposing positions. People use outdated polemics and prejudices to attack straw men that were built decades or centuries ago on outdated scholarship or fundamental misunderstandings of the opposing positions. People generally agree on this and despise those sorts of tactics until they do it themselves. This is exactly what I believe the redeemed Zoomer has fallen into. In his very popular videos and posts, he has sought to teach the masses about church history and theology in a very simple style that is appealing to younger and less knowledgeable people. This is something I generally think is good. I think younger people and less knowledgeable people should want to know more about God, theology, and church history. But these videos and posts are, whether he intends them to or not, influenced by an obviously Protestant prejudice and bias that I think is misleading people. And overall, I think these prejudices and these biases display that he has little to no understanding of Catholicism or Orthodoxy. In Redeemed Zoomer's video, Christian Denominations Family Tree, he says this about the Great Schism.
So then there was sort of like one unified church after the Council of Chalcedon, aside from those offshoot groups. But there was increasing cultural divide between East and West because the one holy Catholic Apostolic Church grew out of the Roman Empire. But then the Roman Empire is like split into the Latin West and the Greek East. And even after the fall of the Western Roman Empire, the Roman Catholic Church still sort of lived on. And all these divisions came to a head at the Great Schism. This is the biggest split ever in church history. It's why it's called the Great Schism. It split the entire church into West and East. The biggest issue was one word: filioque.
Now, I get it. If somebody is going to talk about such a complex historical event like the East and West Schism, you're going to have to simplify things a little bit. But I still do think dividing the East and the West based on the filioque primarily is a mistake, and I'll explain why. When we look at the East and West Schism, we need to have a great deal of context in order to understand it. And I'm glad that Redeemed Zoomer did not throw out the mythical 1054 schism date that many often do, and he did mention that there were long-standing divergent cultural trends between the Eastern and the Western Roman Empire. All of that's good, but it gets even larger than that, and we can see that the filioque is one issue among many. The West had largely adopted a compilation of canons, canon law, compiled by Saint Dionysius, while the East had adopted a code of canon law compiled by Saint John Scholasticus. That, along with other divergent customs in the church, such as shaven priests and the use of leavened bread versus unleavened bread, were primary issues that Photius, who was speaking against the West and was the Archbishop of Constantinople over 100 years before the 1054 date, those issues were listed alongside the filioque when it comes to his anti-Western claims. What does that tell us? It tells us that no, it was not the filioque that was the deciding factor that split East and West. No, it was in fact the authority structure. It was the Roman pontiff and his prerogatives. And this is something I think is difficult for a Protestant to understand. When you're looking at this debate and reading it in the same way you would read the debates between the different confessions or the different perspectives within Protestantism, you're going to see this as, oh, there's different people trying to figure out different interpretations of various doctrines found in Scripture, when in reality, the primary thing being debated here is authority. Is it an ecumenical council led by an emperor who is the primary source of authority when it comes to doctrinal issues like this, or is it the Roman pontiff alongside an ecumenical council with the authority stemming from said Roman pontiff? So understanding that debate is a start to understanding the East and West schism. It's mainly the papacy and the nature of authority rather than one simple doctrine. The next misunderstanding that Redeem-Zoomer demonstrates is more erroneous and dangerous not only to the Catholic and Orthodox, but also to his own philosophy and theological understandings as a Reformed Calvinist. Firstly, he says that the main issue dividing Catholics and Orthodox after the schism is the issue of divine simplicity. In it, he almost correctly defines the term divine simplicity as something that exists without parts.
So Thomas Aquinas believed in something called divine simplicity. That means the essence of God, what God is just one singular thing. God's essence is identical to his attributes. In other words, God is not made out of parts.
I take issue with his use of thing when talking about God, but it becomes more erroneous when he says that this belief in divine simplicity allows us to know what God's essence is.
Because of that, we can understand what God's essence is. We can understand what God is. Even if we can't fathom God, we can still understand what God is. And that means that we can study God, doing theology.
This formulation is to completely misunderstand the Thomistic perspective on this. For St. Thomas, you could not know God's essence. And the reason for that is because God's essence is the same as his existence. What God is the same as that he is. And because God is a universal, and our minds concretely grasp particular things, we cannot grasp the universal that is God's essence. But I must say, the bigger injustice that Redeem-Zoomer does is not to St. Thomas Aquinas, but to Gregory Palamas. And I say this even as a Roman Catholic. In this video, Redeem-Zoomer says,
so while the Western way was a lot more intellectual, St. Gregory Palamas didn't believe in divine simplicity. He believed in what's called the essence-energies distinction.
That's right, Eastern Orthodox. You do not believe in divine simplicity. You must think God is made up of parts. I'm sure you have no problem believing that. What this demonstrates is that Redeem-Zoomer has not read any of the Palamite writings on the subject, because if he did, he would realize that Gregory Palamas formulated such a distinction to protect divine simplicity, although not the absolute divine simplicity of the West, rather than dismantling it entirely. But I think the most insulting thing Redeem-Zoomer says about Eastern Orthodoxy is this.
But the point behind that is basically saying what God is more of a mystery, and the Eastern Orthodox love to appeal to mystery on a lot of things, and that's why they never ended up doing nearly as much academic theology as the Western churches did.
I think he forgets that great men of the East like St. John of Damascus existed, or that works like the Philokalia were produced by the East that blend mysticism and deep theology, much deeper than any modern Protestant theologian would produce today. All of that's forgotten about, and they're branded as just a bunch of people who say, that's a mystery. Oh, that's a mystery, don't worry about it, don't study too much. No, that's not the East. That's not the Eastern tradition, and you have to be more honest coming from a Western perspective if you're going to have any sort of debate and honest discussion with the East. Now, that's enough of my critique for now on that video, even though there's a lot more to critique. There's a lot of outdated Protestant concepts like identifying Jan Hus as a sort of proto-Protestant, when in reality the Protestants should want nothing to do with men like the Waldensians or the Lollards or the Albigensians or the Hussites. Those movements are not proto-Protestant, and I think once they do some digging, the Protestants would figure out that doesn't speak well for their movement. But I digress. Redeem-Zoomer also put out a tweet where he said that laymen studying scripture and theology is actually a Protestant idea, and that Catholics and Orthodox, if they were being consistent, shouldn't do so. Now, this can be debunked in a number of ways, but it's most easily done just by pointing at the historical facts. Firstly, men like St. Thomas More exist. He was a layman, a lawyer, a normal married man, also studied theology and produced works like King Henry VIII's defense of the seven sacraments, his attack against Luther. St. Thomas More produced many scholarly theological works. I can also point to men in the East, men like the Desert Fathers, who were not priests going out to the desert for the most part, but just men and women who were struck by the scriptures, who did study their scriptures. I can point to church fathers and their quotes, like St. Jerome saying, "Ignorance of scripture is ignorance of Christ." All of these are typical things you'll see in apologetics. But I can also point to the obvious facts that Bible translations are approved by the church. In fact, one of the most largely used Bible translations in the Catholic community is the Douay-Rheims Bible. The original version was published before the widely used King James Version. So if it is truly a Protestant idea to be reading the Bible, then why is the Catholic Church approving the Bible to be read by laymen and women? Why bother with creating scripture versions for the faithful? Doesn't make sense, it's not consistent, and it's based on an outdated Protestant polemic against Orthodoxy and Catholicism. If we're going to have good discussions, we have to drop that stuff. In conclusion, I'd like to ask a question of all of those who are involved in this young, youth, conservative Protestant movement being led by Redeemed Zoomer. Have you honestly engaged your opponent's positions? You all admit that earlier on the Christian family tree, you find the Catholic and Eastern Orthodox churches. Now, maybe you think they've gone astray, but do you actually understand the issues at hand? Do you understand the doctrines that are being put forth? Or are you basing your opinions of these institutions on existing prejudices that were written by men hundreds of years ago that might have been writing for a polemical purpose? Examine the actual issues and find out that way what the truth is. By having honest conversations with each other, honestly engaging the opposite side, that's how you better defend your position and how you better come to the truth. Thank you.